Time marches on, and thankfully technology is not standing still. Two big players in the GPU game, Nvidia and Intel, have released updates to their image reconstruction technology. The DLSS SDK has been updated to version 3.7 with a new reconstruction model called Model E. And XeSS has been updated to version 1.3, promising greater quality and stability. So in today's video, I will detail the updates with my own findings and generally showcase the current state of the art as to how the big three upscalers compare in a modern title. And first here, I want to start with XeSS, as the last time I looked at it in greater depth was nearly 1.5 years ago when examining its integration into Shadow of the Tomb Raider, which was a debut title for the technology. Back then, my conclusions were that XeSS, when running on an Intel GPU, produced quality similar to DLSS with only a few shortcomings. It did not suffer from the greater issues that we've typically seen with FSR 2, for example. So I thought it had a great debut in that title, and it proved how important machine learning was to good reconstruction technology. XeSS's use of machine learning is interesting, as it has multiple versions. It occupies a middle place between what AMD and Nvidia are doing. On one side, you have what AMD has done. FSR 2 Plus runs on all modern GPUs that support compute shaders pretty much, but it can have quality issues. On the other side, DLSS only runs on RTX GPUs using their tensor cores and has generally been crowned among gaming press and otherwise as the quality leader. For Intel in the middle there, it has two paths that are relevant to the user, both using machine learning. There's the DP4A version of XeSS, which can run on pretty much any modern GPU from the last 4 years at least, and then there's the XMX version, which runs exclusively on Intel GPUs with XMX units. The XMX version has better quality than the DP4A version, so there's kind of a hierarchy of quality that I'm showing here, with FSR 2 on the bottom and XeSS DP4A above that, then XeSS on Arc above that, and then DLSS usually at the top. This is curious, as not many people have probably actually seen that XMX version of XeSS. As Intel is a relatively new player in the market, not many people have an Intel GPU like I am showing off here on screen right now. So let me just show you what that looks like first of all. Here is an older version of XeSS 1.2 running in Horizon Forbidden West. On the left-hand side is the DP4A version, which you can run on any AMD or Nvidia card really. And on the right is the XMX version, running on an Intel Arc A770. As you can see, the XMX version here wins for quality on a number of levels, but the biggest visible one is that the little floating particles in the air do not have incessant trails behind them in the same way that they do in the DP4A version. There's a lot less trails and ghosting there on the XMX side, so that should give you a sense of what I mean. Better quality there with XMX on. This is the 1.2 version. How does 1.3 that Intel just released improve upon this? Before I get into that, I need to describe a little bit about how I'm injecting XeSS into games. Like DLSS, XeSS uses a .dll system, where you can look in a game directory as you see here, and you'll see a DLL file for XeSS that the game uses. You can change that or override it by just plugging in the new DLL from the SDK. This is not officially supported by Intel as far as I know, but it does work. That is something you'll have to keep in mind for the testing I'm showing on screen here. It's completely unofficial, and official implementations of 1.3 could perhaps produce different results. Okay, enough said there. Let's look first at the 1.3 DP4A path. Left and right here are both using balanced mode at 1440p. The first big thing I want you to notice is how the particles floating through the air in version 1.3 no longer have the longer trails behind them as seen in the 1.2 version of the game. So a core visual artifact has been cleaned up by just plugging in the 1.3 DLL here into this game. If we look at the water, we can also see some light artifacting there, which was causing pixelization, has been cleaned up to a good degree here in the 1.3 version. One less positive difference you can see here is that the inner surface detail kind of has a fizzle in the 1.3 version. You can see that well on the moss here, for example, where the inner surface now has a fizzle in it. It's less stable. You can also see that a bit in the wet rocks, for example, near the water's edge. It's not so visible when you take the image as a whole, but on a macro level, it can convey the look that the game has some sub-pixel detail that is less stable now. Part of this may be down to what the 1.3 model is doing with the image, but another thing it might be down to is the resolution of the images I'm showing here actually being different. See, according to Intel's blog on the matter, XeSS 1.3 has changed the internal resolution from its various modes and it's added new ones. As we can see in the chart here from Intel, the balanced mode I'm showing off in 1.3 is actually the equivalent of the performance mode in version 1.2 regarding its internal resolution. So quality mode, for example, in version 1.2 is now ultra quality mode in version 1.3 in terms of internal resolution that is being reconstructed from. This bears out in performance data. When comparing ultra quality mode, XeSS DP4A path running at 4K max settings on an RTX 4090 in Horizon Forbidden West, we can see a significant 8% performance lead of the same settings with version 1.3. The name is the same, ultra quality mode here, but the performance is different. And that is because the internal resolution is now different. I saw the same behavior across multiple games I tested in, including Shadow of the Tomb Raider, where ultra quality mode ran nearly 17% faster better there with maxed out ray tracing in version 1.3 on that RTX 4090. This behavior is not limited to the DP4A path of XeSS. It'll happen on an ARC card as well if you switch out these DLLs, and I saw improved performance there on the ARC A770 in Horizon Forbidden West at 1440p balanced mode in version 1.3. Indeed, having done some pixel counting on camera cuts, I found it to be the case that balanced mode in 1.2 was around 864p and it counts to around 720p in version 1.3. If you run the quality mode in version 1.3, it'll perform the exact same as the balanced mode in version 1.2. Okay, so the internal resolution is different in version 1.3. Is this a good or a bad thing? Well, it's good that Intel are adding more granularity to the modes that they have. There will now be a native resolution mode and a whole bunch of more in-between modes in total. This is good for the user, I would say, so they have more options to suit their particular desires. It is bad, though, in the aspect of that it upsets an established norm that other reconstruction techniques have also established. Performance mode in XeSS will now have a different internal resolution than performance mode in FSR2 and DLSS, and that could confuse users, confuse comparisons, and lead people to falsely attribute differences in image quality and performance when they might not otherwise have done it. Personally, I wish Intel kept the same scaling levels and names, but they added in new names, for example, for the other levels that they're adding in, so as to prevent such confusion. Either way, this is the way things are, and I'm going to have to account for it, and so will you, and let's see what's going on there. When looking at the DP4A version again here, but the resolution differences are accounted for, so version 1.3 is now set to quality mode, we can see more or less the same image quality differences as before. It's just slightly more stable now on the right hand side when properly adjusted to use the same internal resolution. So I would say that the inner surface detail fizzle is being added here by version 1.3 when I add in the DLL to this game. In total, based upon this comparison of these two images, I would say that the DP4A version of XeSS is largely greatly improved because there's less ghosting and less pixelization on most of the image features like the water and the particles, but it can be a little bit less stable. How about the XMX version of XeSS running on an Intel GPU? With this, I see similar differences as I saw in the DP4A version. If you look at inner surface detail, it can look slightly less stable there in version 1.3, and there's a slight difference in sharpness in version 1.3. You can see that particularly if I look at the ground moss texture there in the distance. that I'm highlighting here. Whether or not this difference in sharpness is a good or bad thing is hard to say. For positives, the water detail is even less pixelated in version 1.3, and if you pay attention, the little particles in the air have even less trails behind them in version 1.3. So there are some key upgrades here alongside some slight negative differences. Looking at other views, I saw some other distinct differences. In version 1.2 of the XMX version of XeSS, any depth of field on screen would have somewhat distracting jitter in it, as you can see here, where any area of the screen affected by depth of field would be jittering. By injecting version 1.3, this will completely go away actually, which is nice to see. Same with the cloud rendering. In version 1.2, cloud rendering would have some jitter in it, which I found distracting actually. In version 1.3, it completely cleans up that jitter, and I actually think it looks quite a good deal better. Though now there's a knock-on effect where particles flying in front of the clouds can leave trails behind them on the surface of the clouds, which looks a little weird. So once again, there are some great positives and some slight negatives here to injecting this 1.3 version DLL into this game. In movement, the version 1.3 of XeSS tends to deliver results that have less aliasing in them and offering smoother visuals. With the XMX version, the difference looks like this, as you can see in the still here. You'll see better anti-aliasing on the edges, better internal detail, and a general look that shows less fizzle in it. In motion, it just means that there's going to be less visible aliasing there and a smoothed over appearance over multiple frames. For the DP4A path of XeSS, you can perhaps see an even greater improvement, where edges are completed better in the version 1.3 and there are far less jaggies overall. And when the character is moving in motion, things look just more stable with less fizzle and pop as the character moves. If you compare the two paths of XMX and DP4A, in version 1.3, you'll see that the XMX model looks better as it is designed to, as it's hardware accelerated. You'll see less aliasing, smoother detail, and more detail with less smearing, as we can see on Aloy's hands here. It's all really cool. Based on Horizon Forbidden West, even when injected unofficially, XeSS 1.3 can provide some visible benefits to a game's presentation, whether you are on an Intel GPU or not. That does not mean it will fix all issues though that one can encounter when using XeSS. For example, I tried it in Shadow of the Tomb Raider, and the issues that I found on that game's water rendering in my initial review were still there in version 1.3. Same in Ratchet and Clank. There, the version 1.3 still has some flicker occurring with the game's vignette filter on the sides of the screen when looking at grass. So it can help, this version 1.3 DLL, but there is still room for improvement regarding official implementations of 1.3 in the future.
One more to go.
Getting over to DLSS 3.7, there is a lot less to cover here, as DLSS is generally in a good place, I would say, and it has been detailed more than enough on this channel over the last 5 years since version 2 came out. Still, DLSS has room for improvement that I've talked about in the recent past. A good example can be found in Avatar: Frontiers of Pandora, as I'm showing on the screen right now. As I covered at launch for the game, the default model D or preset D that shipped with the version of DLSS has issues when the camera sits still. When the camera is still, character limbs, particles, and more can smear to incredible levels. Almost like the previous frame's information is not at all being called like it should. I found it super distracting, and Avatar is not the first time I saw this issue popping up in a game with this preset D for DLSS. It's been a general issue I've seen with this Model D since post version 2.5.1. Back at the launch of Avatar, I recommended people to try and mod the game to use preset C, as we're seeing here. Preset C is used for motion clarity in general, and it fixes the issue, though it has worse anti-aliasing and reconstruction, as you can see on the floor here, where preset C is not smearing, of course, but the floor texture detail is blurrier. Here's where the new preset E comes in. To inject that into this game or any game, what I have done is replace the DLSS DLL you see on screen here in the game directory. Then I've used NV Profile Inspector, along with an XML edition you can find in the video description below, to force the game to use the new preset E instead of the previous default of preset D. When that is done, you can go in game and see some interesting results. Essentially, preset E as introduced in 3.7 gets rid of the poor smearing that can occur in preset D in the previous DLSS versions. So in that sense, it fixes it, like preset C used to, but unlike preset C, it does not have a lower reconstruction and anti-aliasing quality. Take a look at the floor here. Notice how the texture quality there is higher in preset E than it is in preset C. So we're getting a kind of best of both worlds here scenario with preset E. That is nice to see. Other titles where I saw this behavior are likewise fixed. For example, in the Path Trace version of Half-Life 1, that showcases smearing with older versions of DLSS that use that D preset. But with preset E, that is completely cleaned up and looking great. Beyond that though, I haven't found many other great advances above the previous DLSS state of the art. When looking for other issues, I found that preset E still had them. Clouds and Avatar, for example, still jitter with DLSS in the new version like they did in the old, so I didn't really see a big improvement there. Also in Hitman 3, Agent 47's clothing can still potentially show off a moire pattern in preset E with 3.7 like it can in older versions of DLSS. Dragon's Dogma 2, yeah, fast-moving grass there still kind of looks smeary. So from my perspective, the main thing this new version of DLSS does in 3.7 is that it fixes up the potential for those large smear errors to occur, and not too much else. With that being said, let us go over to how the three reconstruction techniques compare briefly. Let us take a look at the movement in Horizon Forbidden West here at 1440p while using XeSS's DP4A version with version 1.3 and DLSS using that E preset and version 3.7. Here I think we can see the prototypical differences between the upscalers in motion. Let us pause to highlight. On the far left with FSR 2, the moving objects lack good anti-aliasing and kind of have a generic fizzle around them and in the object. Importantly, if you look at the plants and the grass surrounding Aloy here, you can kind of see that crunchy, over-sharpened, blown-out pixel look. That is the background behind her, which has been disoccluded, and disocclusion fizzle is happening there. With the XeSS view in the middle running the DP4A version, we can see a cleaner presentation than FSR2 without that pixelated look. Though, if you look at the quiver and the staff being swung, you can see a slight blurriness is there, as a light bit of smearing is occurring. If you look over on the far right with DLSS, you can see like XeSS's DP4A version, there's no pixelization and no fizzle. But you'll notice that the reconstruction of moving objects is cleaner with lines being completed and details sticking out better, while there's no blurriness or smearing occurring on the staff or quiver like we see with XeSS's DP4A version. If I swap in and show the XMX version of XeSS, we can see how XeSS in the XMX version further distances itself from FSR2, getting rid of most of the blurriness and smearing on the quiver and staff, but still falling slightly short of the quality and clarity as offered by DLSS in its 3.7 version. Once again, a clear hierarchy here when going from left to right. Going over to Ratchet & Clank, we see a similar story there, with me this time focusing on the XMX version of XeSS. As Ratchet moves forward, we can see all techniques suffer from a moire pattern on the carpet beneath Ratchet. Yet the look of the objects, like Ratchet in movement, offers stark differences. That fizzled and pixelated look we see in FSR2 in Horizon is present here in Ratchet & Clank. It's the way FSR2 works. Comparatively, DLSS and XeSS look quite a bit better with better anti-aliasing, though you can see on the distant platform here that I'm highlighting that XeSS is producing a less clear image. Advancing forward, the differences become most stark again when effects come on the screen. If we watch it play out, I think you can see what I mean. It almost looks like FSR2 is having a full screen pixelization occurring. If I pause it, you can see why that is happening. In FSR2, typical behavior is that translucent particles and effects tend to turn into large-scale aliases, while XeSS and DLSS reconstruct them more smoothly into rounded, higher resolution shapes. From left to right here, once again, I think you can see that hierarchy that I mentioned at the beginning of this video. Side by side, I think we can see here that XeSS and DLSS, for the most part at the moment, look pretty great. We can also see with these side-by-sides that FSR 2 still has great room for improvement. Like how I'm covering DLSS and XeSS in this video, I will be covering an update to FSR 2 soon enough with its version 3.1, which according to AMD should be launching in the near future and is looking to resolve some of the issues that I talked about in this video, specifically the moving objects having a pixelated look to them. And as such, I will be using the footage I gathered for this video to show differences from FSR 3.1 when that comes out. Getting to the end of this video, I am happy to see XeSS and DLSS advancing in quality instead of just stagnating. Can FSR 2 close the large gap that exists at the moment, even though it doesn't have machine learning? Time will tell, and I think we'll have some answers soon enough. But in the meantime, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did enjoy it, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. If you are already a subscriber, hit that little bell in the corner to be informed as soon as Digital Foundry posts a video. Support us on Patreon, comment below, follow on Twitter. As always, this ist Alex, bin ich und auf Wiedersehen.